Oh, perfect. It's all live.
Okay, we are live.
2 years ago.
One quick transaction to finish there. Okay.
For fire.
Right.
It's important.
So this is the Senate Education Committee, March 21st, 2:00. We have with us today Secretary Saunders. And you know everybody, we all know each other, so we don't have to go around with those formalities. So we haven't had anyone for a while. But it's probably been relatively recent, but it feels like a couple of years. So we have,
Is there like lounge music?
I hear that.
Yeah. Okay, I'm sorry.
um,
Oh, that's so funny.
One of those video things. Right?
Yeah, that happened to me, so I kept looking at my phone.
So we've been grappling here with trying to develop a framework of questions to ask ourselves and things we've been thinking through. Optimal district size and range of district size the question might be. And we've heard different sets of testimony about that. We wanted to check back in with you. And we have a map that we've looked at, a proposal from was maybe a reaction. And then there's been questions about timeframe for instance, district boundaries in Manhattan. And there's been some questions about the kind of support we might get from the agency if we cut it this work. And I know that I want to, let's just wanted to give you the floor a little bit to talk about a few of those questions. Talk to us for a little bit about the questions I have to go that way. So, yeah.
Excellent. Good afternoon. For the record, I'm Zoe Saunders, Secretary of Education. Thank you for inviting me back to continue our conversation around education transformation. I want to thank the committee for really making measurable steps in contemplating the future state of our education system. Really today, I just want to signal our commitment to working with you, to looking at your goals. We know that you have drawn lines on a map, and we really appreciate that. I think they're really aligned with what we're talking about big picture in terms of achieving that scale, focusing on quality, and really appreciate the sense of urgency that the committee is taking and looking at drawing those lines. I think it's clear that the intention is really to be also responsive to some feedback from the community about really reflecting on different configurations and also really honoring the traditions of Vermont. So just want to, there's certainly some considerations that we'd have to work through, as I mentioned, with any sort of change with the proposal or configuration. They're also tightly connected. So what we'll be doing on our end is being able to identify those and work with you, but really think that there's a lot of promise and that we can come to the table and work together to get to the right configuration for districts. I do think we have time to do that work. And I'm also happy to walk through some of the additional details around how the agency is ramping up our support and capacity to help with that transition. I know that is of paramount importance to the committee. It's also very important to us.
Which transition?
So in terms of transitioning to the future state, so as we look at the governor's transformation proposal, we have built in to that a timeline, and with that is an assumption around the agency's role in supporting that. So happy to elaborate on that. Your committee has put together a proposal that looks at different district configurations, and we're very willing and happy to work with you on that to land on the right approach. And really appreciate the seriousness.
We don't have a committee consensus around that yet. I just want to make that clear. It's something we're looking at.
Right.
Yeah.
But I just appreciate the seriousness of purpose that the committee has put forward in looking at those lines, and really reinforce that sense of urgency to be able to define those lines. That's really important for the overall proposal as we're thinking about the foundation funding formula and also the quality matters that we included on ours.
Yes.
You mentioned this transition to the future state.
Yeah.
I have been asking for about a month for a timeline. I don't have a written timeline from you all.
We have provided written timelines in multiple contexts. So the bill does outline a timeline. It's
The bill,
Yep, it's a 4-year phased approach.
could you put it in one page, please?
Yes, we can put it in
I
one.
thought that's what you were bringing to.
We've, yes.
Okay. Great. I mean, that's what the superintendent proposal has is like a 1-page transition timeline.
Yes, so I'm not exactly sure where the communication breakdown is occurring because we've had multiple opportunities to share the timeline. So the way that the timeline is laid out is for this session for law to be passed. There's a 2-year transition period built in that's also contemplating property tax stabilization efforts before we move into the new governance structure and the new foundation formula, which we've outlined as fiscal year 28 would be the first year of that transition.
I had not heard about 2 years of property tax stabilization. We don't do 2-year budgets, but I might have missed, did finance get information about a proposal for stabilization of the property tax next year that's artificial as well?
No, so we, as you noted, we don't do 2-year budgets, but what we've outlined within the plan, and this is also specified within the bill, for the next fiscal year, the governor has proposed buying down the property rate using $77 million.
FY 26.
Correct. And then within the proposal, we built in some cost containment strategies that would go into effect. And then there would be a block grant for fiscal year 27, which would be largely based on fiscal year 26 with some inflationary adjustments. And also assuming that there are some cost containment measures put into place. So that has been outlined before we move into shifting to the foundation formula.
Can you tell us where in the documents we have that outline?
I can look, I didn't bring all of our policy briefs. But
Okay.
I absolutely can.
Can you do that today? Please. Just because before town meeting, when I asked for a timeline, you said that's a fair request. And then I never received an email since then. And then I mentioned it again at the confirmation hearing. So I am just struggling with the timeline, truly. I don't have it written down anywhere.
I'm not sure why that's the case because we have shared the timeline. So yes, I can share a timeline with you.
Did you share a
one-pager.
1-page document with the timeline?
Yes. You have seen that.
That has FY,
Mhm.
X, Y, and Z and tax stabilization for 2 years. And
The tax stabilization is for 1 year with the block grant assumed for fiscal year 27, along with implementation of the cost containment strategies for giving the system 2 years to prepare for that transition to the new funding formula.
but you did mention before town meeting that you have FY 26 as when there would be a new flat five.
FY 26, FY 27 would be the first year of implementing that new tax, that new class size.
FY 27 is the new class.
So as the 25-26 school year, as they're developing their budget, that's
Mhm.
why it's important to signal that future state around the criteria to begin planning for the fiscal year 27 year.
So, we have had, thinking about the district size, so you proposed initially districts that range in size from maybe 9,000 to 15,000 or something like that, or 35,000. We've heard testimony of the V's all came in and said minimum of 4,000. And then we had the superintendents yesterday saying something more like 2,000 to 4,000. And I just wanted to get your reaction and what and how does that fit in? How does the evidence base model fit into this and what's one of that? So one of the things we're trying to do as we're, I will confess that I've been thinking less about transition than I have where we're trying to get to.
Mhm.
And then think about how we back down to that. So I've been focusing on what do we want to get to and what's the governance framework that we want to be looking at. And so we're having we had some initial discussion in the committee. We heard some people, we've talked about a range of sizes even amongst ourselves for districts. And so just wanted to have you talk to us about that again. And you know, I think have you seen the superintendent's proposal?
Yeah, so the superintendent.
I'm not trying to, like, my point isn't this. My point is just for us to get a lot of information, listen to a lot of people giving us their reactions and their own thoughts about how it'll work.
Right.
So we want to get that. Yeah.
So first, I think what you're hearing is actually a lot of consistency on the core principles. I think there's consistency around the three pillars that we're all working towards, right? Looking at educational opportunities and quality as one, equity as the second, and third, affordability and sustainability. So I think all the different proposals that are coming forward are really aligned around that framework. And that's a really, I think, helpful starting point. That's by design. There has been a lot of work in engaging with the field and with the commission and thinking about that framework and understanding that the challenges that we are facing require a very multifaceted approach to support. You're also, hearing a lot of consistency around the interest in a foundation formula. You're hearing a lot of consistency around the benefits of achieving scale through regional districts. I think what a lot of and then you're hearing a lot of consistency around the need to have a greater focus on education quality. The superintendents yesterday noted something we've been sharing as well, that there's a lot of variability when you look at graduation requirements. When you look at indicators, you can have one district have 5 indicators for graduation requirement and another 135. That's a really big range when you're thinking about comparability. So I just want to reinforce that we're actually all starting from a really shared foundation around what we're trying to achieve. Where there's been some questions, I think, of late is really around that district size and being intentional and thoughtful around drawing those lines to achieve our intended outcomes. So the governor's proposal is based on an evidence-based model. So the General Assembly contracted with a consultant to provide recommendations on the best way to move forward with funding our system. Icahn and Autumn used an evidence-based model, and they produced a study that was shared widely and also that the commission was aware of. The initial criticism of that study was that it was not adjusted for the Vermont context. So the work that the Agency of Education did with our consultants, who have also worked in other states, was to make some of those adjustments from an understanding of where there have been some gaps with that model in other states, and also incorporating the feedback that we heard from the Listen and Learn tour that was really important for us to fund and resource within our system. That evidence-based model assumes that 3,900 students is the floor. So I want to be clear that that's the floor to achieve efficiency, and any amount of students above that really adjusts in terms of the ratio of kind of staffing that you would expect to see within the system. The research around district size is not conclusive. There's been a lot of research around kind of the minimum district size. I think that's what's really been the focus. There's not a lot of conclusive research around the maximum, though you do see you see less benefits beyond 55,000. So we're not kind of operating within any of that range above what would be seen over the size that we're using diseconomies of scale.
Yeah, sure. I can just ask a question. Just going back a few sentences, the 3,900 being the floor for efficiency. In that context, how do you define efficiency? What does that mean?
So it's based, everything that we put forward is part of an evidence-based model. So there's a compendium of research that has guided that framework that is assuming certain inputs into a system that will achieve educational quality. So it is a framework that we're using that has been developed with national researchers over time to approach a funding formula in a way that's more focused on achieving high educational quality and results. So that's the framework.
And So regarding the research and the folks who were consulted, I mean, some of the feedback I'm getting from constituents is the concern about the input that's being provided to the AOE not entirely coming from people in Vermont, and people who may not have more nuanced understanding of Vermont and how things work here. So with the range of consultants that were hired by AOE, were any of them from Vermont, or did they consult people who work in Vermont in education, or was the Vermont centric information drawn from the Listen and Learn tour, or
Yeah, so it's it's a multifaceted approach, right? There's certain expertise that's really unique to developing a state education funding system, which I think we would want to get guidance from experts who have been part of that in other states. And in that regard, for this proposal, it was informed by really 3 researchers who have done this work in other states. The 2 particularly that the Agency of Education contracted with have a lot of deep experience within the state of Vermont and in prior legislation in Vermont, along with working directly in the field with superintendents and with business managers. So the reason that they have that perspective, national view, but have also a deep experience within Vermont. Beyond the consultants, the Agency of Education was very engaged in collecting input from the field, reviewing our specific data. And that's why I say we're actually starting from a real place of shared understanding. You're hearing a lot of consistent themes coming into the proposal. I think where we're having some conversation is really, how to refine it to a place that everyone feels comfortable and understands what that looks like. So it was absolutely informed by the data that we reviewed as a state with our team. And the feedback that we received through the Listen and Learn tour. The report that we put out from the Listen and Learn tour identified many consistent themes of the great things that we want to preserve and protect within our education system, and where areas where we would like to make some improvements to achieve our goals. And we were intentional around building an approach that addresses those needs. And particularly providing, really addressing some of the equity issues that were surfaced from Vermonters. This plan was really designed to really elevate opportunities in our state and expand those educational offerings in a way that's sustainable.
Thank you.
Just going back to the district size, and I think that's where a lot of the questions are coming from. And as I just want to reinforce, I think the research is really not conclusive on the up, right? It has focused a lot on the minimum, and so some of those numbers that you've been hearing certainly are more focused on a minimum of like 2,000, 4,000 size.
Yeah, so that reminds me, one of the things that was said yesterday was based on the Superintendents Association sort of said that larger districts will require them to hire more people because they might need, for instance, 2 special ed specialists or something. I wasn't quite sure, but I guess the question is, talk to us about efficiencies that you believe are inherent in larger districts. That's probably the question.
Yeah, so as we're looking at larger districts, it was really a question of resources. In our current system, we know that sometimes our smaller districts do struggle to hire at the central office some of the specialized expertise to support their needs. So the larger districts are designed to pool resources so that we can ensure that our principals are getting the support that they need, and also teachers. So when you look at the model, we did just publish some proposed budgets within the model and showing kind of the flexibility of what you're able to do. So what does that impact with this at the district office for students? So I'll take this a step back. When we look at budgeting within this framework, there's 2 things to keep in mind. One, the state needs to guarantee that the amount that we're providing we're able to offer a great education. And so because of that, we've used this evidence-based model that's assuming certain inputs into the system. But it is important to note that there's a lot of flexibility within the funding model to meet the different needs of the districts and different needs of the communities or schools within a larger district. So we did an exercise of doing budgeting on a prototypical budget. We had some feedback that the legislature would like to look at that in a more refined way, recognizing that there's different pay scales in these districts, that there may be different programs in these districts that have different costs. And so within this next set of budgets, we did do that based on the real data within these 5 districts to show how you could prioritize the goals. So for students, what that translated into in this sample budget was increased social workers, guidance counselors, mental health counselors, behavior specialists, and behavior support paraprofessionals. It increased reading teachers, interventionists, expanded after school and summer programs, and instructional coaches in every school. It expanded college and career readiness courses. And within this model, I offer 2 specialized magnet pathways go ahead.
Sorry, expanded from what?
From our current state.
So you're saying that, I mean, it's really hard to compare. You're saying that every school would have more access to those specialists than they do now?
Yes.
And did you calculated which schools have those positions now?
And I think it would be helpful if it would be valuable to the community to actually set up some time where we can walk through the budgets, right? Because I think that's a really key piece. The whole point of this is to really pull those resources at a district level so that, yes, you can guarantee that there's access to those resources. And
Do you mean this one?
We got those.
That's,
Yeah, that would be valuable.
I think it would be valuable because I think that may be kind of where some of the questions are coming from. Getting more concrete around what is possible as you're budgeting with this amount is really a critical piece of this conversation. And you're able to prioritize meeting some of these needs that we've heard from teachers would be really important to have within our system. And so it allows for that within these larger central offices.
so can I just ask a question about that? So I pulled up the Champlain Valley budget, and it says this has a count of 250 counselors, social workers, or mental health professionals. Is that correct?
I don't have it in front of me, but
that number that's what that's designed to be. So this is all the schools, you've tried to enumerate all of the school staff. And you've run this by the Superintendent's Association?
So this is our model that we will be running by the superintendents, yes. So this is just, and again, there might be different choices that are made depending on the priorities of the school board, its communities, and the superintendents. But this exercise is designed to do some of that modeling to understand what that would look like. Because I think some of the questions are, how would we fund our central office? How does that look different than how we think about our central office now? So that's just another pool and resources as we evaluate it. But I think coming back to the point of the work that this committee is doing, as you think about future state, we're very much a willing partner to come and work with you. The governor signaled multiple times that we may need to revisit the specific lines, but that there's time to doing that, right? And I think making sure we're clearly articulating the goals that we're trying to achieve, we can bring in some additional support and resources to evaluating that and the extent to which it can meet those goals.
Questions?
I just want to make sure she's gone through her remarks before we pile on.
I was more here just to express, that I really appreciate the committee taking on this bit, that we're very much willing to come around the table and make it work. And that I do feel like we have time to do it this session, and that there certainly isn't an urgency to be able to move forward. And I hope that through this conversation, you can identify for me what some of the outstanding questions you might have that we can help support in bringing in expertise or resources to moving this forward. So
One question first, and then, when, and again, I'm not trying to do this at all, I'm just trying to pull things apart, make sure we understand. Everybody who's in here says the evidence supports their position. And you use the term evident. So can you help us understand why, for instance, what the superintendent said, we're kind of saying if they could, if it looked the way they wanted it, be a maximum of 4,000 and maybe more closer to 2,000. And they said, that's what the evidence supports.
They didn't just say
You're
that, they
saying-
sent us links.
Yeah.
That, I just want to.
And you're saying, I'm trying to get to this.
Yeah.
The same thing. And you're saying, no, the evidence-based model suggests something different than that. How do we figure out when we have people saying the evidence supports our position, this position, how do we pull that apart and how do we?
So when we're referencing an evidence-based model, it's an actual model to developing a foundation formula
Which you use 3,900 to do that,
as the floor.
but that's the number you used.
The floor for achieving scale is 3,900. And then there are ratios that you make adjustments beyond that number. So the evidence-based model is an approach to developing a foundation formula. And the assumptions are that that will work at a minimum of having 3,900 students in a district. Above that, there are adjustments made based on ratios of students to the resources that would be required to achieve the educational quality described in the evidence-based model. Evidence that may be talked about in other contexts might be specific research reports that are studying different districts, configurations. The compendium of research around districts is inconclusive. What I think is consistent is that the larger you have, there are more economies of scale, and the smaller you have, the more costly the system can be. There also is more research around the minimum. So the research around 2,000 to 4,000 has been done around the minimum for efficiencies. And then those diseconomies of scale typically within the research is around 55,000 or more. So that's just kind of, the reality of where we are.
Senator Heffernan.
Could you cite those in reports? I need some links.
Yeah, we're happy to share also just research links around that. But this isn't around pitting folks against each other, right? What we're trying to do is think about how do we inform this process in a way that makes sense for Vermont, right? And when we say evidence-based, it's a specific approach to developing a foundation formula. Evidence that might be cited or other research studies that are informing broader education policy. We're happy to share some links. And I know that those have been shared with you also, but I think there's a conversation we need to have around how to do this within Vermont. There's a lot of research around kind of the smallest to achieve scale. There's research around when you get too large, where it becomes maybe less efficient to operate. We are well within the bounds of those bookends with the governor's proposal. And as we've said consistently, we are open to looking at other district configurations, but really evaluating them according to the objectives that we've outlined. And you might have some additional objectives that we would want to articulate and measure.
Senator Heffernan.
So being in Senate, I have Senator Hinsdale that's been, we need expert people to do this, which I concur. We have them. There are superintendents, there are principals. Have you asked them or sat down with them and say, okay, we need to scale down to somewhere between 10 and 20 districts so that we meet our scale, because they know who's working best together and where the line should be, should not be. It will save Vermonters a lot of money because our experts, our superintendents and principals are working on it to work together. That's one thing that's bothered me a lot. They come in and tell me all the reasons it won't work, but superintendents gave us that great proposal yesterday, that there again was no configuration. And I reached out to CERC and said, hey, can you give us what you'd like to see? So at least we have, you've set the parameters. This is what we're looking for. Now, superintendents get together, and what hurts is that we're going to go from 52 down to 20. So people know they're gonna lose, some people are gonna be out of a job, just no way around it, so they're not really happy about it. But if the legislators, us legislators say, this is what we want, and the legislature have the power to do this. I'd rather have you working with us and saying, here's what we feel as superintendents and principals works the best, because we know our people and our teachers and our kids better than you do. I would like them to come forward and start working on that to help us out. So when we sit down and we sit in front of our other legislators that don't, just like, let's not do anything. Here's what the superintendents, principals, teachers kind of put out. They believe is what's best for Vermont if we break it up. That's what I'm going to ask the AOE to do, and the superintendents to do, and the principals to do. We all know this needs to happen. And if we work together, it will happen. So, that's my statement, I guess.
Yes.
Do you have the resources to provide somebody with this committee as we go through that has all the evidence-based knowledge that could say, I mean, we have a legislative council, we're going through the legal aspects of Title 16. If she's sitting in that chair, she doesn't say anything, but you can tell by her body language that we're going someplace we shouldn't. I'm thinking that because we've read so many things in the last 2 months that I'm not sure where to go to find it. Would you be able to have somebody here with us help guide us along this process?
Meaning
AOE, somebody.
we're very willing to be
Okay.
engaged in this conversation. I think I think we've been, hopefully feel like you have had access to the Agency of Education in
Right.
these conversations, and are absolutely committed to continuing that.
I believe you were saying that you would have somebody present during this whole, or that you can.
Even if it was
Representative.
virtually. So we could say, hey, we got a question, the superintendents are saying this, what's the evidence base? And that way, because we're gonna make the policy, but we're getting so many competing messages that we just need to be able to, and I'm not an expert on education. I don't, I'm not educated in that, and I don't claim to be, but I'm on this committee, and I'm committed to doing what I need to fix it, so.
Consider Lisa.
Thanks, Drew. So I appreciate the opportunity to have this conversation, and in particular that it butts up right behind the Superintendent's Association's conversation yesterday, which was also helpful. So I got a couple of questions, and I'll do two. One's really simple. The other one may take a little bit of response. So the first question is, we were asking about the notional kind of org chart between the district and the principal. And I think that that's contained inside the budget. You had a variety of budget spreadsheets, but in there, it's the granularity is down to the position.
Mhm.
And those are the kind of, we can derive from that an org chart.
Yes.
Okay, thank you. That's just confirmation. Okay, so
And that org chart could shift depending on priorities of the school board
absolutely.
established.
Okay, thank you. The one thing that the Superintendent's Association did articulate quite well yesterday is that we need to be, for one of the major 3 pillars of this transformation, which is the quality of the academic program for the students. I thought that they did a great job of focusing back in on, for that pillar, what's the vision for the future focus, high quality educational opportunities? And then they, in a different section of their paper, highlighted the guaranteed opportunities. That's a kind of a difficult thing for us to latch onto because we're not a room full of educators. And I'm wondering if the AOE or the AOE with the State Board of Education or with the other groups can help share with us what is the guaranteed opportunity for students and what is that end goal? Because right now it's words. And I know that you guys have a vision of it, but I'm wondering like who should be presenting that vision so that we put it on the table, we all poke at it, but in the end we agree, yeah, that's the end goal for the quality of education we're seeking for the students.
I think in Vermont, we've articulated the vision of what we want every student to have access to. And I think the challenge has been, how do we ensure that there's fidelity of implementation to that? And consistency across the state. So I'd be happy to bring that in. I actually think there's a lot of shared understanding on the vision, but our system hasn't always been resourced to provide that consistently and equitably across the state. So when we approached this work with the governor's proposal, we did articulate we thought were really important quality standards to ensure that those were built into the funding formula. And that does include the ability to offer a range of programming, a range of electives, to provide the wraparound support in terms of mental health and counseling, and to have the sufficient administrative support to protect planning time. So there are the funding formulas is not just about money. It's really policy decisions on how do we ensure that we are reinforcing our system to deliver on those educational goals. And I'd be happy to expand on that. But a couple of key areas that we elevated was that making sure all of our schools are resourced to provide the allied arts. That is the area that a lot of cuts are made. And so there's also an intention of ensuring that could offer broader range of electives in middle school. So we adjusted that within the model and expanded access to college and career as well. So those were a couple of key priorities that we brought out within the funding that we know have historically been challenging to implement.
Okay, so you say it's embedded in the funding, and I believe it.
Yes.
But is there also like a bullet list of this is, and I'm not looking for like granularity down to the dollar, but these are the major moving goals for guaranteed opportunity.
Yes, and I your question is helping me identify that there is probably some translation that needs to occur between what's built into the funding and the expectations in terms of educational programming. Because every line item within the funding formula is assuming that comes with different resources, whether that's staff resources that can support a number of programs, number of courses, number of electives, ratios with terms of access to a counselor, nurse, interventionist. All of that is built into the funding formula and is very much aligned with the articulated vision that Vermont has put forward, both through our education quality standards and in other documents that I think are really important to bring into this conversation around how we provide a holistic education for our students. Yes, I think your question is pointing that we can do that translation and mapping for you so that there's greater understanding of what these resources, what can be offered.
Okay, so I'll tell you this, I'll tell you that, so I have that question kind of over the past several weeks, and what are those program goals? And obviously yesterday, the superintendents were here, they articulated the same concern. So translation, yes.
Yeah.
I do believe you that it's inside the foundation formula now, that there's line items and you roll them all up, but to articulate, these are our priorities. And these are primary, these are secondary, however you want to do it. Be very, very helpful.
Okay. And thank you. I appreciate that feedback, and certainly we can follow up. We have articulated some of the broad priorities as we think about access to different educational opportunities. So I'll just recap those. And then I think what you're looking for is another layer down, like programs that are offered, right?
Yes.
More specifics, course catalog, electives, what's available. And there are a lot of assumptions that are baked in to the model. In terms of some of the broad priorities with this proposal is to expand access to early childhood education, expand access to after school for particularly tutoring for INEEDS communities, expand college access to college and career readiness, starting as early as middle school, expanding the elective opportunities in elementary, middle, and high, ensuring that there's consistency in that, and moving towards teacher pay equity. Those were all very expressed priorities as we developed this plan. And then there are certain inputs within the foundation funding formula that I think we can extrapolate to give greater clarity to what that actually looks like in terms of, the programs, the course catalog, things like that.
Those are the things that I think you're saying. you get access to.
That's correct.
On a consistent basis, only if you have the
The
floor,
scale,
yeah,
yes.
yeah, love that better. Yes.
No, I'll give you, no, I have more, but
I
if
didn't
there's
see
somebody
it, I didn't
else.
see it, right.
Okay.
So, go ahead.
Okay, so, not a surprise, but yesterday when the superintendents were here, they did mention, common, IT systems, common finance systems. Is that baked into to the cultural ups and are you willing or ready to offer like a timeline of how we get from where we are to where we need to be?
Absolutely. So this is a great opportunity for us to really evaluate and align our systems. We've noted historically that we've had consistent data challenges. And a lot of that is because we have these different systems that don't work together. So we have some important lessons learned from the past when we've implemented statewide system adoption. We actually shared that recently with another committee. So that's a point of reference as we identify lessons learned and thinking about how to create alignment and integration with our systems. As part of the transformation proposal, the governor has allocated $4 million towards the agency's support. Within that, we've heard a lot of questions around the capacity of the agency, the use of consultants, use of staff. And so actually we've provided some refinement. We're going to report to House Ed specifically today. Is with that amount, we'll bring on 5 permanent positions for the Agency of Education. That we've enumerated what those roles and responsibilities would be during the transformation, and then how they would be factored into the larger organization and sustaining their support. Simply put, these roles will really help to support district quality and education quality. And one of the key roles that we did identify was for a data integration support specialist. And so what we would see in the next year, which is kind of year 1 of that 2-year preparation period, they would work closely with a business operations support specialist. They would work with the district offices to really evaluate the disparate systems and be able to inventory that in a very refined way, and really enumerate those changes would be along with costs that would come back to the legislature next session. So that is an explicit goal, and we resourced within this proposal additional staffing to do that work. These staff positions don't operate alone, right? They're still supported within a broader agency structure of experts, and also would benefit from subject matter expertise of consultants in specialized areas. But that work that you're describing takes a very intensive review. And we've recognized that, and we've devoted resources and time next year to really outlining what that would look like, and what support would be required for really system adoption statewide.
So in summary, you said that you anticipate before the next session starts.
Yes.
But at least you'll have your head around, well, how much, is there a problem? If yes, how do we get from where we are now to where we want to be, and how much will it cost notion?
Correct.
Okay.
And then in the interim, we've already developed tools where we can through an API process, collect data across disparate systems. And so it's called Ed5. It's a new approach that we built. They kind of lovingly call it like a vacuum, kind of as a vacuum that connects to these different systems that student information systems across the state, and helps to clean and align that. So even in the interim, before we get to a system-wide adoption, we have refined our tools as an agency of being able to pull data from disparate systems and do that cleaning. So because it is a massive effort to do a statewide system adoption. So I think we need to be mindful that there's a planning process involved and a timeline. And then in the interim, there would be some work doing really pulling and cleaning and aligning the data to support the work.
No, David wants to keep going.
No, I want to share, but I have questions. But I want you guys, I don't want to get in front of anybody's.
But I feel like, if you're on
No,
a certain line of inquiry,
these are all different topics.
So you, okay.
So we get yesterday a lot of questions about class size, school size. And I think, Well, I used to be in the planning business. Sometimes you can get, because we haven't got the framework for the plan developed yet, you can get into the weeds about everything that was brought up, was important, but like, the special support for, mental health specialists and, those are all dependent upon three things. The size of the school, the size of the district, and the terrain. I mean, as far as if it's a rural district or if it's an urban. So I don't know how, when everybody, the good news is that I think everybody that was here yesterday had been committed through at the end of the day to saying, oh, yeah, we see the how big this task is and we want to be part of it. So I was encouraged by that, but we also need to be left alone to come up with this plan. And when we need something, we need to say, hey, we need some help. That was why I said what I said before.
Understood.
Yeah.
And so we've also been paying, close attention to the different, the questions. We did organize the policy sprint teams, with the field. So those policy sprint teams did include representation from superintendents and principals and business managers, and other specialists to help us understand what we need to consider. So that summary will be, coming to you. And I think that's an important starting point for the conversation. So the sprint teams that have assembled have kind of completed phase one of that work and being able to identify those key considerations. We've learned a lot through that process and have kind of refined our thinking and think that's a good start. And then as we look at that, we identify priorities for further engagement. We've asked that the sprint teams re-engage, so that then we can circle back and say, here's what we've heard, or here's what's being explored. What additional questions do you have? So I want to note that we have established a mechanism to get that feedback, and we'll be reporting to you kind of the first round of what we learned. And they seem very willing to continue to be engaged at the time that there's additional questions or maybe different policy directions that are being explored so they can weigh in. So that is a mechanism. And I think there are a lot of details in the weeds, right? And I think to my earlier point, we've really contemplated a lot of those details and built it into a pretty comprehensive plan. So just class size, for example, is an assumption built into our foundation funding formula. And we have articulated that explicitly in terms of the class sizes for K3 and 412. As part of the modeling that we've done, we've also shown that you can really achieve the goals with adjusted lower class size. And so we would be comfortable looking at that and saying that that adjustment would work within the model. So what we're willing to do is say, any of these kind of questions, let's put it back into the model, let's evaluate, and then we would be able to come back to you around whether that works or if there's kind of a vulnerability or risk that we would need to identify based on that adjustment.
First of all, in my head, I have an educator I talk to saying, I'm on a sprint team, but I don't know what I'm sprinting towards. So I think it's really good you're going back to them, and hopefully it's not just with more questions, but to really hear the feedback about the proposal that you've presented, and if that represents what they feel like their feedback was driving at.
Yeah. So the sprint teams were designed to be very focused, and so the listen and learn was the time for us to kind of emerge a lot of the key considerations and themes that we need to address, put that together in the proposal. The sprint team was able to say, this is what we've heard. This is how we've designed this. These are the policy assumptions built in. What are the additional considerations that we need to take into account and that the legislature will need to take into account? And so those have all been documented and are very helpful. The intention was not to get to consensus. The intention was to be able to understand how some of those how the policy was being operationalized and to bring into account other questions that really need to be grappled with. So we think the next natural step is bringing that to this committee and other education committees to review and identify what else needs to be further explored, and then re-engage. So we did communicate clearly the intent and then the next steps.
I think it's worth underscoring that you just said the intention isn't to build consensus. Because I'm just making note of that. So I don't know if you meant that to, in the way that I'm taking note of it, which is that you're not looking for consensus from the field on some of these big pillars of your plan.
No, I think what we're looking for is looking at the whole. So when I'm talking about consensus, there are so many moving parts to this plan, right? And that's what I mean, is that I think it's going to be very hard when you think about transformation for everyone to say, we love every part of this, right? The intention is to be able to build consensus around achieving the shared goals and having clarity around how we're going to get there. In those meetings, we weren't looking to build consensus between a business manager or superintendent or a principal, but rather be able to clearly identify unique considerations that they may have that we need to take into account, aligned to the broader goals.
Okay. The superintendent's proposal, you said you read that.
Mhm.
What in there do you not agree with? You talked about shared agreement. What in there do you think is not evidence-based or misses the mark or is not aligned with your vision or plan?
So I don't know that I think what they've put forward are some key considerations to developing a transformation plan. I don't think they had an opportunity yet to get farther into proposing a full plan that accounts for the specific districts or the foundation formula. So they're not bringing forward a funding or a governance plan. They're bringing forward considerations that are important that they're asking for the legislature to take into account in reviewing any policy proposal.
So I believe, at least when we talked to them, you heard they were talking about districts of 2,000 to 6,000. That I would say is baked into their plan. Do you disagree with that?
I haven't seen the boundaries that they've defined or how they're articulating the other characteristics that they're looking to achieve within those district boundaries.
Okay.
So beyond saying a number, but we've come forward with a proposal that says we're looking at these objectives that we've articulated, which is related to having size as a part of that. The needs of the students are a part of that as well. And also looking at the taxpayer equity as part of the approach. So I think what I'm not hearing in that is an overarching plan around these are the specific districts that we would like to propose.
So
And then here's how we would fund
okay, so
districts.
they had an alternative proposal about the districts, which is that similar to a lot of other processes we have in the state, it would involve a public process and a group of diverse stakeholders who would come up with the boundaries.
So we are not proposing different district boundaries. In other words, a key principle of our approach is keeping the existing district boundaries intact as we're creating larger regional districts. So we're not suggesting that you would go in and take an existing district and say, this part of the district goes to this other region and this goes to this region. We are being very intentional about keeping those intact.
I think what maybe sort of Rohan's still getting at part is that their proposal specifically was for us not to draw boundaries and for that to happen over the summer or something like that, summer and fall through a different process than the legislature. And so we have kind of the choice that it's actually be interested to get us trying to get it done by the end of the session. So that then for instance, the government operations committee can begin to work with the board part of this because they can't do anything until the plans are drawn, or wait and do the district boundaries through some process that they proposed over the summer and fall. And I guess one question, what's your reaction to that?
I think a delay would be really challenging for us to be able to address some of the key issues that we have at hand. I mean, we're in a position right now where districts are having to focus on cuts, right? And that's what we shared really early on with doing this planning, is many of our districts are in an impossible situation. They want to be able to provide the type of educational opportunities we're describing in the plan, but because of resource limitations, that often is impossible. And so they're faced with a really difficult decision of cutting. So we're in a position now as a state, do we continue to kind of hold on to the status quo, which we know will result in further cuts, or do we really take this time to change and transform into the future state? I think also there's a lot of uncertainty with funding at the federal level, which also creates a sense of urgency for us to be able to move to a place where we can stabilize our education system and future-proof our education system. So I think a delay creates some challenge.
So I think, I mean, that does rely on the assumption that in the next 2 years, we're going to be achieving some kind of budgetary cost savings, which you joked that your proposal artificially buys down the property tax for 2 years.
The proposal is really getting us into what a foundation formula does is provides stabilization and predictability. Moving towards that foundation formula, we've assumed that there's maintenance of maintenance of our existing school portfolio in that process. The fiscal year 28, which is when we're proposing the foundation formula and governments would take into effect, is not the end of the transformation. It's the beginning of being able to have a stable funding system, in which case we can continue to strengthen and involve the community in some of these other components.
I mean,
Okay, we're done.
Yeah,
We're done.
yeah.
We have to stop.
Yeah.
But Secretary Saunders, we will have you back maybe
Okay.
as early as Tuesday.
Great. Keep my questions.
So